Thank you. Thank you. So thank you very much for inviting me. My name is Hollie Schmidt. I'm with a patient advocacy organization for multiple sclerosis called Accelerated Cure Project. And I'm delighted to have the opportunity to talk about the patient engagement movement in clinical R&D, which means including people with medical conditions as partners in the research process because they are such valuable collaborators. And I'm a strong believer in this movement, so I'd like to describe what it's about and hopefully make other people a believer as well. And I'll also share a bit about my other chief clinical research interest, which is diversity and inclusivity in research. So I include this slide, sorry. There we go. I'll include this slide to demonstrate the contrast between how things used to be not actually that long ago for patients and how things are now. And when I came across this a couple of years ago and putting together another talk, I was really startled by it. It shows an article from the Lancet from 1985 entitled "To Tell or Not to Tell, the Diagnosis of Multiple Sclerosis." So believe it or not, deciding not to tell a patient that they had MS wasn't that uncommon in 1985. And this was not like the Victorian ages or anything like that. This is the modern age. And people were not being told their diagnosis. The reason for that was back then there were no effective treatments for MS. So some doctors thought that telling somebody they had MS when there was nothing they could do about it would just cause a great deal of emotional distress. So you could say maybe that's true, maybe not, maybe it's not a great way to go, but I think either way it's a glaring example of patients not being engaged and not being empowered, you know, to not even be told their own diagnosis. So fast forward, okay, this slide came out a little wonky, but fast forward 15 years, which is when my organization got its start. ACP, Accelerated Cure Project, was founded by a high-tech entrepreneur who was diagnosed with MS in 2000. And he was in his 30s at the time. He saw that he had many decades of living with the disease ahead of him. He also found out quickly that there were only a couple of drugs available for MS then, and both of those required frequent injections. And they were not a cure. They were only a partial treatment. He also learned that there was little known about the causes or mechanisms of MS. So he recognized that even though he didn't have an MD or a research lab, he still had very valuable assets to contribute, including skills and talents and connections that could help accelerate the pace of MS research. And he wasn't content to sit on the sidelines. He was a real entrepreneur and a go-getter. He wasn't content also to conduct fundraisers for existing organizations. So he founded ACP with the mission of creating new research resources for MS. And he helped to demonstrate that motivated patients can make a huge difference in research. So I've been involved with Accelerated Cure Project since its founding, and I've seen the roles of people with MS evolve substantially over the years. When we got started in 2001, as you can sort of see the grayed out area on the left, a person with MS could be a patient and they could be a research subject. And they were also encouraged to raise money for research, but their own ideas about research were not really sought out or valued. But nowadays, these roles have changed and expanded. So rather than being a research subject, which is a very passive sounding term, people who participate in research studies are referred to as participants or volunteers, which better reflects their active and voluntary roles in research. Similarly, when people with MS, or I imagine, you know, pretty much any medical condition these days, when they see their healthcare providers, they come equipped with more information and are much more involved in decision-making about their healthcare. They educate themselves about research, they come up with their very well-informed research questions, and they are the experts when it comes to what it's like to live with the disease. Nobody knows better than they do, not even the healthcare providers that provide their medical care. And when they come together to join or form patient organizations, they can make some very important contributions to research. So here's one example. My organization has an initiative called I Conquer MS. We launched it to support patient-powered research. or patient-centered research in MS, and to connect patients and researchers in meaningful new ways. So what is I Conquer MS? It's kind of like a registry, but actually it's more like an online community where people with MS can come together specifically around research. We formally launched I Conquer MS in 2015, and we currently have, I think it's actually now over 5,700 members. Our members are contributing information through the portal about their health and their quality of life on an ongoing basis. And we can also reach out to them to collect biosamples through mailing kits or at-home collection services. All right, something is going wrong with my slides here, but I will pretend that you can see what's here, and I'll describe what you would have seen. We conduct a number of patient-centered research activities, but the reason I'm speaking here today is our growing number of industry collaborations. We've had numerous collaborations where we connect our members with companies who are looking for patient feedback on things like new MS products or clinical trial designs. These engagements have taken a lot of forms. For example, we recently worked with EMD Serono to form a patient-focused drug development council. And this council provided in-depth and super valuable guidance over the course of the year on the planning of a specific clinical trial. The members of the council met either in person or via teleconference with members from ACP and members from EMD Serono every month or two, and also provided input offline via email and sometimes one-on-one phone interviews. And the topics that this council discussed and contributed input on included things like selection of patient-reported outcome measures and the development of educational materials for trial participants. We also realize that sometimes there's not necessarily need for something that long in scope. We've also organized short-term interactions with other companies, and these have taken the forms of advisory boards, focus groups, interviews, webinars, surveys, that kind of thing. The benefits to our biopharma partners in engaging with patients in their R&D process ultimately, I believe, include better recruitment and retention because the patient voice has been incorporated into the study design, which then also can lead to avoidance of protocol amendments or other costly changes. And again, on the patient side, better adherence to study activities because the burden is reduced. Ultimately, benefits to people with MS can include the greater likelihood of a successful trial, which is what we all want. People with MS want trials to prove whatever point they're trying to prove, and that might lead to a new drug coming to market, or maybe a new aspect of value that's important to them. In my experience, any level of patient engagement or any type of engagement is a great thing. However, I think the benefits are greater when the interaction happens earlier in the study design process, when changes are easier to make and creative ideas have more chance to take hold. Longer term engagements such as councils and steering committees, I think, also offer unique benefits. For instance, if a group has formed and is working together over time, there can be a chance for a greater honesty and open discourse because of that trust that gets established. And also, when there's a standing group, the company can get quicker turnaround of feedback because there's already a group that's standing ready to respond when a new question comes up that could benefit from patient input. So for ACP, supporting these kinds of engagements is not only something we feel is important, but also something I think we do quite well. We have team members who have experience in clinical research as well as the experience of living with MS. So we can serve as a bridge or a liaison between industry and patients. We also have, through I Conquer MS, a registry of people with MS what we can filter to find people meeting specific characteristics like demographics or features of their MS. And we even know things like, you know, how much or how often do they complete their surveys, which is an indicator of how interested they are and their follow-through potential. So while you might not think of patient organizations as clinical research organizations, I'd just like you to know that there are organizations like us that can actually play this type of role in some aspects in clinical study design. And we're just one of many organizations that's working closely with industry to achieve mutual goals. There are organizations like the Cystic Fibrosis Foundation and the Leukemia and Lymphoma Society that are making game-changing investments in drug development. You've probably all heard of the first drug approved for cystic fibrosis a few years ago, and that was funded by the CSF. It was obviously a great health investment, being the first drug for this terrible disease, but also a great financial investment because that organization wound up receiving $3.3 billion in royalties from the drug. Parents of children with rare diseases are also powerful forces for research. There's an organization called Cure SMA that played key roles in the approval of Spinraza, which is a spinal muscular atrophy drug, by assisting with clinical trial design and recruitment. And in a similar vein, the Parent Project for Muscular Dystrophy was instrumental in influencing the FDA to approve a new drug for Duchenne muscular dystrophy. And finally, groups like the National Psoriasis Foundation and the Michael J. Fox Foundation have taken up the challenge of ensuring that their communities can actually get the treatments that are available. For example, they're educating payers about the treatment needs and challenges faced by their patient population. And many organizations, and ACP is one of them, are also having dialogues and interactions with organizations that are developing value frameworks like ICER, to ensure that patient perspectives are incorporated into these frameworks, because they can influence payers also in deciding whether and how to cover certain therapies. So this is a busy slide. I'm not going to go through it in detail. If you would like to see it later, I can share it with you, but I just want to include it because it does a great job of showing the wide variety of ways that patients and their organizations are now engaging in drug development. And this starts with the earliest stages of discovery and goes all the way through to post-marketing activities. Since this audience will probably appreciate concepts like evidence and methodology and rigor, I also wanted to point out that these concepts are also being applied to patient engagement. In fact, there are several organizations that are developing metrics and standards to formalize and substantiate the value of patient engagement in drug development, so that it's not just seen as the right thing to do, but also the smart thing to do. One of these organizations is called PCORI, the Patient-Centered Outcomes Research Institute. It's a nonprofit that was established through the Affordable Care Act, and it has billions of dollars in funding to fund patient-centered comparative effectiveness studies. But they also emphasize very heavily community engagement and research, and they fund efforts to develop and analyze the impact of engagement methods. The Clinical Trials Transformation Initiative is a public-private partnership aimed at improving the conduct of clinical trials, and they recently developed a financial model to quantify the benefits of patient engagement in drug development, demonstrating that there is a return on investment by doing so. And that one is at the bottom right-hand corner of the screen, and you can go and access this paper and read it to see an idea of how much money your company could save by including patients in its trial design. And then also patient-focused medicines development is a collaborative effort that's involving patient groups and patients, the pharmaceutical industry, and regulators. And they're working to set standards for how and when patient engagement should take place. So there's actually a wealth of activity and a wealth of information being developed through these activities that can help guide organizations who are interested in starting or expanding their efforts in patient engagement. And then finally, I'll mention also the FDA is getting into the game as well. They're not always the innovators in new topics that are coming up, but they have bought into the idea of patient engagement and in drug development. They have started conducting disease-specific, patient-focused drug development meetings to more systematically obtain the patient perspective on specific diseases and their treatments, so that they can learn more directly from the stakeholders involved about what's important. And it's also in the process of developing and releasing guidance, such as the 2 guidance documents on the screen, on how to incorporate the patient voice in product development, as shown here. So I'm going to switch gears a little bit now and tell you about a related project that I've been working on for a few years. Patient engagement activities are intended to benefit everyone involved, However, the problem is that not all patients are engaged equally. Hopefully, you're aware of this by now, that racial and ethnic minorities, people with lower income levels, and people in rural communities are less likely to participate in research, or should I say less likely to be included in research. And that means that the evidence base generated by research does not reflect these communities, and therefore they don't benefit to the same extent as others. And I wanted to illustrate this very starkly by a graph, and this comes from the FDA's own data of the racial groups involved in a phase 3 trial for one of the MS drugs that's been approved. You can see that out of over 1,700 patients, only 12 were Black and only 2 were Asian. And as you can imagine, low numbers like this of minorities in clinical trials make it impossible to answer questions about whether a drug is efficacious in these specific populations. And under-inclusion of certain groups in clinical research also has follow-on effects, beyond that particular trial that contribute to systemic bias. The types of patients who participate in research engagement activities and can thus influence research often tend to be those with research participation experience and connections. So if somebody has participated in a clinical trial, they might be more likely to look for other ways to have influence, and those who have not probably won't even know there are ways to have influence. So underrepresentation of a community in research itself as participants can lead to underrepresentation of that community's interests in research prioritization and planning. So we recognize that racial and ethnic minorities were underrepresented in ICONQUER MS and in MS research in general. So we formed a multi-stakeholder group to address this issue in MS. Our 2 goals were to try to understand the drivers of this imbalance in research participation, and then also to conduct outreach efforts to draw attention to the problem and help to work on possible solutions. What we found in our investigation is that people of all races and ethnicities do believe in research, and they are interested and they are willing to participate in studies. There is a higher level of concern and mistrust among minority groups. This is true, but it's not overwhelming, and it shouldn't be a reason for them not to be included or invited to participate in research studies. Perhaps more important is the fact that not everybody is invited to participate in research or knows how to participate in research studies. So we've created toolkits for clinicians and researchers that include some tips for recruiting diverse study populations. For example, and here I'll refer back to patient engagement, including minority patients in the study design and implementation process will help ensure that their interests and their needs and their concerns are addressed, which will, I think, pay off in increased trial participation diversity. Getting back also to the FDA, they are interested too in increasing the diversity of clinical trial populations. That's one of the reasons why they produced those trial snapshots that I showed before. And they are also developing guidance on this topic. So you can read a draft of one draft guidance on their website here. Another effort, which is incredibly comprehensive and I think is going to be quite helpful, is being led by the Multi-Regional Clinical Trials Center of Brigham and Women's Hospital and Harvard. They have established a collaborative group, I'm a member of it, to write a detailed document and a guidebook on clinical trial diversity. It outlines the case for diversity, describes a variety of scientific, ethical, and business case considerations, and provides tools, case studies, and other resources for companies, or I guess other types of researchers too, that are interested in having a diverse study population. This document has been in process for a couple of years now. It's currently in the review process, and hopefully will be available for everybody to access later on this year. So I'm hoping that I've given you some food for thought about the benefits of patient engagement and inclusivity in clinical trials. The slide contains some links to some of the organizations that I mentioned earlier, and also my contact information. I would love to be contacted if anybody would like to follow up. And I thank you for your attention. I hope you all stay safe and healthy, and I'm happy to take questions if there are any.